I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zinner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
The Minnesota Legislature hit the ground running this week, passing a bill to help people pay their shockingly high heating bills. We'll talk with state lawmakers tonight.
Ontario and northern Minnesota officials are touting a geotourism partnership with the National Geographic Society.
And a sudden heart attack claimed the life of West Duluth businessman Charlie Bell this week. Tonight we'll talk with a cardiologist about staying safe while shoveling.
These topics and a lot more next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. And Julie, we have a packed show this evening.
There is a lot to talk about, so
might as well get started, huh? We'll introduce our first guests.
All right. Thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. The 2014 legislative session began this week in unusual fashion. On the first day, the State House passed an emergency heating bill and moved it on to the Senate. By Thursday, the bill had made it through the legislature and was signed today by Governor Dayton. Is it a sign of quick work to come from lawmakers? Joining us with more is Representative Joe Radinovich, a Democrat from Crosby and chief author of the heating bill. And Representative Mary Murphy is a DFLer from Hermantown who chairs the State Government Finance Committee. And thanks to both of you for being here. You for the first time tonight?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Representative, the heating bill passed with overwhelming support. Are there a lot of people in the state that are really suffering this year?
Well, there are 250,000 Minnesota households that rely on propane for heat. Obviously, not all of them qualify for the LIHEAP program, but the LIHEAP program is a federal program designed to help those low-income households with their heating needs of any variety. Obviously, we've seen that propane has spiked from levels around $1.50 per gallon to over $6 a gallon before it settled down to around $3 here. And so we recognize that we need to do what we can to help those Minnesota households relying on that program.
You mentioned the spiking. What's causing the spikes in propane, and is there anything that the legislature can do to get to the root of that problem?
Well, certainly, you know, some of the factors that have led to the spike were that we had a late crop season this year, and farmers used about 5 times more propane to dry their crops than they had in previous years. So that was one part of the spike. The other issue was that there was a maintenance on a pipeline that brings in 40% of the propane from Canada to Minnesota. Now in the future, that pipeline is actually going to be shut down, and so Minnesota faces some very serious concerns with regard to our propane supply going into the future. Right now in the Energy Committee, in the next week here, there's going to be hearings, I think, on propane issues this winter, as well as looking forward to the next few years. The administration has been doing what they can previous to the legislature convening to bring propane from Texas, and that meant allowing truckers to work more hours and working with Governor Perry down there to allow Minnesota trucks to fill in Texas.
Representative Murphy, this is supposed to be a short session this year. Will the minimum wage bill pass this year?
Yes.
It will pass.
In some form.
In some form?
Yes.
Where do you expect it to end up?
Well, it's in conference committee now, and we're starting off. The House passed a bill, and the Senate passed a bill, but they were very widely different. And so a conference committee was appointed. And yesterday, the conference committee met for about 3 hours last evening and I talked to both a senator and a House person that were conferring. And they said we made significant progress, but there's still a ways to go.
Do you think it'll reach $9.50 an hour? Or somewhat lower than that?
My opinion, if it reaches $9.50 an hour, it will be on a phased basis. There will be steps up to it.
I see.
That's
okay,
what
sure.
I believe, but
I
I wasn't there, so I don't know. And that they have not reached concurrence on that.
I think one important thing to keep in mind is that the minimum wage since 1968, if it had kept pace with inflation, would be at $10.70 an hour right now. And if you look back and use the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to figure out what $9.50 would be,
Sure.
that's basically the equivalent of 1980 to 81 levels minimum wage.
What do you say to Republicans and to small business owners who fear such an increase?
I say you didn't keep up when
Well,
you were in charge.
And I think that, you know, there were big gaps in where the minimum wage lost real value between 1981 and 1990, as well as 1997 to 2007. And so, you know, I hear their concerns, and they're not lost on me, but we also have to be concerned about those people who are living on the minimum wage. Right now, if you work full-time on the minimum wage, you make $15,000 an hour. And so taxpayers are picking up the rest of what it takes to subsist those families, heating assistance, child care assistance, medical insurance, and other programs as well.
Mm-hmm. Representative Murphy, the short session typically a bonding year. What do you see in terms of major infrastructure investments that could potentially impact folks up here?
Oh, there are lots of things. Roads, bridges, forests. They're all part of the bonding process. And education. The University of Minnesota has a building in for consideration. Lake Superior College has a building in for consideration. St. Louis County has the NERC project in for consideration. City of Duluth has 3 projects in for the Wade, the North Shore, and others. We hope maybe the Sioux could get in there. And the Spirit Mountain. And so there's projects across the range. There's sewer and water projects that are part of the Public Facilities Authority where grants are. I have a bill that's going to be heard on Tuesday about library accessibility grants. The money comes from bonds to bring library facilities up to accessibility up to code.
The number that's being talked about is $840 million. Do you think there's going to be a lot of dickering and bickering over how that money is spent?
Well, I think that there is some consensus on the size of the bonding bill coming out of an agreement from last year. Obviously, the interesting thing about a bonding bill is you have to have a supermajority in order to pass it. So in the House, we have to rely upon Republican votes in order to pass the bonding bill. For me, I think that means finding projects of regional significance. In my area, we have the Brainerd Airport project, and Senator Rude, who's a Republican from my area, my senator, as well as my Democratic housemate in Brainerd, we've all come to an agreement that we need to support a project like that. The Chamber of Commerce and the economic development corporations in our area, as well as environmental groups, are supporting the development of that project.
Question for both of you, really. What 2 things do you feel absolutely must get done this session?
Well, I think a minimum wage needs to get done, and I think that right now, obviously we're looking at a surplus of $1.23 billion. It was just announced today.
Yep.
And so there's going to be a lot of conversation about, how we best put
Should that go back to the taxpayer?
Well, I think maybe perhaps it should go back to the taxpayer in the form of lost education revenue or in wages for long-term care workers, as well as maybe setting aside some in reserves. And of course, there's a discussion right now of the tax conformity, which is, I think, an important issue and allows Minnesota's tax code to match the federal tax code.
Mm-hmm. Representative, what are your priorities?
I think the 5% for healthcare workers is very, very important. Job training is money for job training is very important. But most important is that we come out with a balanced budget and we keep the budget balanced, and we have done our very, very best for people in education, from early family, early childhood, all the way through graduate school.
And do you think the surplus is going to have a big impact on how that balance is achieved?
It'll be a lot more comfortable reaching stability. It's a very good budget forecast that we received today, and I think that it will give us an opportunity to really pay for our priorities.
Do you expect tax cuts?
I expect,
Yes.
Yes, I expect it will pass tax conformity, which will result in tax cuts for several Minnesotans, as well as perhaps the B2B taxes. I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is that in 8 of the last 10 budget years, we've faced deficits, and so finally we have, a nice surplus. There was a saying I learned early at the Capitol, and it referred to previous years where they were facing those deficits, and it was that as the watering hole shrinks, all the animals start to look at each other a little bit differently. And so, during that time, we've seen cuts to education that are very real for rural parts of Minnesota. The large part of your viewership has seen what that's done to their districts and the rise of levies and the impact that that's had on educational opportunity across the state.
Sure.
All right. Well, lots of work ahead of you two and your colleagues down in St. Paul. Thanks for coming in and sharing some insight tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
Sites like this are common in Duluth. According to Arrowhead Builders, the home building boom is on and has been for about 2 years now. The fact that many projects are underway so early in the year is a good sign that 1989 will continue that trend, and not just in Duluth.
We've got a lot of building in Hermantown, Proctor, Two Harbors, and other surrounding areas.
The homes going up are increasing in both size and diversity.
I think people want more in a house today. If they're able to move up, I think you see people moving as the economy improved here. People were able to move up into a higher priced house, more amenities.
Along with rising expectations have come rising prices. The average home under construction right now in Duluth runs over $100,000. And interest rates also have continued to climb. They currently range from around 8.5% to 11%. But that hasn't stopped folks from building new homes.
I would guess if it gets to 11.5% on fixed rate, we'll live with it and we'll have a very good year in housing.
You may not have heard of it before, but the Heart of the Continent Partnership is a coalition of Canadian and Americans working together on cross-border projects in our region. The group has announced a partnership with the National Geographic Society to promote geotourism and bring more visitors to northern Minnesota and southern Ontario. Now here to tell us more is Frank Jewell, a member of the St. Louis County Board, and Lisa Radosevich-Craig is the Partnership Coordinator for the Superior National Forest. Thank you both for being here. Frank, before we get to geotourism, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Heart of the Continent Partnership. What is it?
So it's an organization that has been around for about 7 years and in one form or another. And really, I'm going to kind of pass this off to Lisa because she's the person who's been around the longest and really knows this history.
And so the Heart of the Continent Partnership was pulled together a bunch of the land management agencies as well as friends groups, small businesses, everyone to support this beautiful area. We have over 5 million acres of public lands between northeastern Minnesota and northwestern Ontario. And we wanted people to see this region as a whole instead of all the separate little parts of it, and to help and work with the communities around that are surrounded by public land.
So a website has been developed. What do you hope to do with that website?
So really, you know, people hear that we're developing a website, and I think really what we're doing is developing a collaboration across 2 countries, across multiple communities, including nonprofits, including people from a variety of backgrounds. We're going to work together to really brand and tell the story of this region from the perspective of the people who live here and
For the
work here.
purpose of?
So partially to bring people here, to tell them that this is a fabulous place, that they ought to be here, but also to encourage and build on what the people who are here, the businesses that are here, and really promote those.
Lisa, as you mentioned, you've got this broad region and a lot of public lands that are kind of part of the same ecosystem, and it's split by these human-made boundaries all over the place. How challenging is it when you start to look at branding the region and marketing it outside of here to deal with all of those boundaries and the issues that each one of those agencies and organizations has to do in managing their land?
The piece that's exciting about this area and how we can brand it is that you can do almost anything you want to do recreationally in this Heart of the Continent partnership. So if you like the wilderness and the quiet sports, there's 1 million acres of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and the 1 million acres of the Quetico. If you like, the snowmobiling, the motorboating, there's places to go and do that with the different national, the National Park, Voyageurs National Park, and outside of the Boundary Waters. And that's really what we're pushing it. And for part of the marketing that's going for tourists overseas that want to come for that, 2-3 weeks, like come to Heart of the Continent. You can, there's just so much to do.
You've partnered with National Geographic. What do you hope that will do for you?
One, the name, National Geographic, it's got...
It's a wow.
It's a wow. And they were real excited. They came a couple years ago. We had a big conference with the communities all around this area, trying to help the economic benefit of the small communities is another big piece. And Frank, you can talk about the excitement that National Geographic had when they came and spoke to us.
So I think part of it is that they really saw us as a group that had already formed part of what they had been trying to build in other places. There's 17 geotourism sites that they've worked with around the world. We'd be the 18th. They are in the places like the Balkans and in Portugal. They're in the United States. They're in Newfoundland, the Four Corners region. And they said, you are one of those unique places that we think is wonderful and that people don't know enough about. That the Border Lakes region is a unique place, and they really wanted to work with us, both because of its uniqueness, but also because of this wonderful group of people who'd already been working on it.
Now, you mentioned that word geotourism, and people who are watching might never have heard of that. So when you talk about geotourism and when National Geographic talks about geotourism, what do they mean?
So I think what it is it's about the tourism that really brings out, so really it's about using the skills and the abilities and the assets of the communities there and promoting those outwards so that when people come here, they go to the mom and shop motel, or they go to the great, I went to, for the first time ever, to the Hoito, a famous Finnish restaurant in Thunder Bay that I don't think anybody would know about unless it was promoted in that way.
All right. Well, Lisa, Frank, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best of luck and success with this. So
Great.
Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this week, well-known Duluth businessman and former candidate for mayor Charlie Bell passed away unexpectedly. Bell was reportedly shoveling snow when he succumbed to a heart attack. We'll have more on Mr. Bell later, but right now we're going to talk about staying safe while shoveling. Joining us is Dr. Nizar Saleh, a cardiologist with the Essentia Health System. And Doctor, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
How common are heart attacks while snow shoveling? Are you seeing a lot of them?
Well, there are anecdotes and there is very little science. When I am on call, I happen to see 1 or 2 patients coming after shoveling snow. But the science is very limited, actually. There's only one study I could find from Ontario where they looked at 500 people who showed up in the hospital there with a heart attack, and they found that about 7% of them were shoveling snow. So about 7% of all heart attacks happen during shoveling snow. Now this may be an underestimation of the real problem, because people do not always report that they were shoveling snow when they show up in the emergency room. They just
Is it exertion, the cold air, a combination of that? What brings that on?
A combination of everything. The cold air definitely put more stress on the heart. The shoveling, especially for people who are not fit, they haven't done any exercise. They go out and we start doing a lot of shoveling. And shoveling is very demanding. People do not probably do not know that very well. A lot of people do, but some do not. And if you want to compare it, it's probably about the same as running 5 miles per hour.
Really?
As far as calories consumption. Yeah.
I see some people wearing masks when they shovel snow. Does that help to keep the warm air in?
That's a good idea. That means that the body has to do less work to warm up the air, and that will put less stress on the heart.
Doctor, what are the warning signs if somebody is out shoveling or just in life, that they could be having a heart attack?
There are almost always warning signs. People ignore them, but are there. They can vary from one person to another, and this is what makes it difficult to be sure. It could be chest pain. It could be simply short of breath or feeling fatigued and tired and pale, maybe even nauseous at times. Especially in elderly people, it could be unusual symptoms, just fatigue and not feeling himself. But the younger people typically have chest pain or arm pain or shoulder pain. It varies from one person to another.
Is it usually intense enough that you can't just dismiss it as
Again,
normal?
it varies a lot. Sometimes it's very mild pain. Other times it's a crushing, like an elephant sitting on my chest. That's a typical description. So it varies from one person to another. Again, this makes it more difficult, more challenging to diagnose.
Is there a difference between sudden cardiac death and a heart attack?
Yes, there is. There are two separate entities. A heart attack can lead to sudden cardiac death, but not every sudden cardiac death is because of a heart attack.
What would bring that on then?
Sudden
cardiac death.
Heart attacks is probably the #1 cause, especially people 50 and older. Other people who have genetic diseases such as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or other congenital disease. We talked about dissection earlier, where the big aorta and the big artery in the body, the aorta, can dissect or unfold from inside and rupture, literally. And this can cause sudden cardiac death during shoveling snow, too.
So a person who is seemingly in good health can all of a sudden have either sudden cardiac death or a heart attack.
Correct.
What are some steps that people should take if they think they're having a heart attack? How important is it to get into the hospital as quickly as possible?
Crucial, very important. That's probably the one thing you can do to make a huge difference when somebody's having chest pain is to get to the emergency room as soon as possible. Because bad things can happen, such as sudden cardiac death, or even if a patient does not die, the damage to the heart muscle is happening all the time. Every minute there is a few muscle cells that are dying. So the longer it takes to get to the emergency room, the more muscles in the heart have died, and make it difficult to recover completely if they get to the emergency room.
Are heart attacks different between a man and a woman? Are there different symptoms maybe?
It's the same condition, but symptoms may differ. There's some debate about the differences in symptoms, but the typical symptoms we always talk about are more men-related. Women tend to have slightly vaguer symptoms, but usually it is the same in the same boat, kind of like chest pain, shortness of breath. They tend to have more shortness of breath and chest pain than men.
Now, we've had a lot of snow this year. It's been brutally cold. Have you been seeing more people coming in concerned about heart attacks this winter than a typical winter in our region?
The statistics I'm aware of, we have seen more people with heart attack this year compared to last year. I don't know if it has to do with the snow shoveling or the cold weather. It just happened, or simply normal variation from one year to another. It's difficult to tell for sure.
Any steps that people should take to maybe prepare themselves before they go out shoveling so that they have less likelihood?
The important thing to know is that the heart attack, even though it happened at the time of shoveling snow, it has been cooking for maybe for years, if not decades. So the first step is to actually take good care of your body before you get to a point where you have a heart attack, such as eating healthy fruits, vegetables, and less red meat, and exercising on a regular basis. And this is probably exercising on a regular basis is your best defense against having a heart attack when you're shoveling. And if you plan to shovel, don't shovel on a full stomach, and try to do some warm-up before you go out. Use a smaller shovel so you don't have to do a lot of lifting when you're shoveling. And if you have any symptoms in your chest, shortness of breath, or you're not feeling well, take a rest. Actually take frequent rest even if you're feeling fine. That's always a good idea.
Wow, good points.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Dr. Saleh.
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate
Thank
you
you
coming
very
in.
kindly.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Time now for the week's business news from Business North. ArcelorMittal has agreed to buy iron ore pellets from Cliffs Natural Resources for 2 additional years through the end of January 2017, which also will add 2 years of life to the Empire Mine in Upper Michigan. Just a year ago, SR Steel Minnesota announced it had entered into a long-term pellet supply agreement with ArcelorMittal, but the unavailability of financing has indefinitely delayed the completion of SR's processing plant in Nashwauk. Cliffs intends to produce up to 23 million tons of pellets this year in the United States.
City officials in Grand Rapids have been notified that Kmart will permanently close its local store probably by June. Kmart officials did not respond to a request for comment, but according to media reports, the retailer, which is owned by Sears, has shuttered 11 stores since January. 2 more Minnesota stores will cease operations this spring. Sears also is struggling, having already closed 22 stores nationwide this year. The corporation lost $358 million during the fourth quarter and $1.4 billion for all of 2013.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Duluth businessman Charlie Bell unexpectedly passed away this week while shoveling snow. Bell was a former Chamber of Commerce president and staunch promoter of the West Duluth Business District. He also was a former partner in the Bell Brothers Funeral Home and separately launched several elder care companies. An Eagle Scout, he was active in scouting and at Asbury United Methodist Church. Mayor Don Ness, against whom he once ran, said Bell was a passionate community leader, a rare breed of man who dared to dream big and then rolled up his sleeves to get the job done. He was 64 years old. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Charlie Bell will be missed by a lot of people in this community. Now, if you have a comment on our show, call now, dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdsc.org and visit the WDSC website for the latest program updates, news about the station, special events, and more. And Julie, Almanac North is off the next 2 Fridays during the WDSC membership drive, so call in your support for public TV this week.
It's very important time of year, so if you watch the programs, please make a point of calling in with that pledge.
That's right. Thank you. For Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend, everybody, and be kind.